All right, hello everyone, and welcome. It is Monday, March 18th, and we are starting out here in week 3. You have now completed your Angry Bots music composition and sound design, and have completed all of the music and sound effects for both projects. And so now we sort of turn towards the technology aspect of the process. And this week you will be using the software, game audio software known as Wise, to implement your audio into the game, or get the music and sound working in the game. It is an industry standard piece of software that is used in a wide variety of games, and it basically allows you to take the raw WAV files that you now have for both your music and sound effects, and we will be going through the process of how you can take those audio files and set them up in this particular software so that the game can access them and use them to play them back properly while somebody is playing the game. So, um, our topics for this week will get into this process, and certainly want to let you know that if you have any sort of issues with the Wise software or any sort of technical issues as you are working on this project, please reach out and let me know as soon as possible to make sure that we can solve any sort of technical issues, certainly by this week, or maybe as you work on it through the weekend. If you run into any issues, we can continue troubleshooting things before you have to turn everything in for the final version next week. So I would definitely suggest downloading the software and working on the project as soon as you can through this week to run into any sort of technical issues, or into any problems as early as possible so we have as much time to troubleshoot that. So, excuse me, I want to go through the process of how to actually download the Wise software to make sure that you have access to the right version. We will be going over your Angry Bots compositions, submissions here in just a bit. But before I switch it over to the archive, I want to make sure that you have access to download the correct version that is necessary for the class. Now, I know the archive describes the correct version and how to get access to it, but the website has changed a little bit, so I want to point out a few things to get all of this set up. So, first off, let me go to the correct website here. You are going to download the Wise software, and this is available at audiokinetic.com. Audiokinetic is the company that makes the Wise software, and just to show you real quick why we use this software, there's a page here in community called Powered by Wise, and these are a lot of very popular games that are utilizing the Wise game audio tools. They use all sorts of means to create their games, but it is a very popular, common piece of software that a lot of these companies use to get all of their audio set up in a very kind of detailed and organized manner. But I always like to kind of scroll through this a little bit to show you some of the popular games that are currently being used or currently using this software. So, when you need to go download everything, let me go back to their first front page. When you need to download everything, you can hit this blue Get Wise button and go to Download Wise, and you're going to download the Wise launcher. Click on this and it should start downloading. I guess you have to log in, give them your, create an account with them, but you'll eventually download the Wise launcher. And once I, oops, where am I going? Wise launcher. Once you download that piece of software, it will look like this when it opens up. Well, I don't want to download the update right now. You will obviously download the newest version. But yours will look something like this with all of the news articles here. And you're going to go to the Wise tab. Now I have all sorts of new version or other versions installed, but the correct version that you will install is this one right here. The newest and latest kind of 2016 version, or the last, I guess is a better way of saying it, the last version of 2016 Wise. You can do that by going to all versions down here and switching to 2016.2, and then just use, it really doesn't matter, I don't believe which version of 2016, I think it just has to be 2016, and this is the last version of it. So go ahead and install that, and then the archive and the slides and all of the videos and all of the class material will kind of pick up there where you are working in this version. If you do go off and install other versions, then it's not going to work with our projects this month. So there are some other cool things that you can do with the later versions. If you dive into these tools and you want to find some other resources to work with, there is, if you go to the samples tab here, there's something called the Wise Adventure Game, and it'll have you download the Unity game engine. You can just run the game itself and check everything out. There's a whole bunch of documentation that goes along with this, with videos and learning resources, and it's a whole game that you can add sound effects and music and kind of dive into this tool a bit more if you want to learn some more, or have some more resources beyond the class. If you're interested in the Unreal game engine, and these are all tools that we will discuss this week, there is something called the Wise Audio Lab, which will run in the Unreal engine and give you some other resources to work with. So, but overall, you will need to go to the Wise tab here, go to all, make sure you're switched to the 2016 version, and go ahead and install that. And if you want to get particular, it's 2016.2.6.6153. So that is how you will get access to the software that you need for this week. There are a lot of materials that dive into how to set up everything with your 2D platformer project and Angry Bots using Wise. And by the end of this week, you will have your 2 games working with your custom music and sound effects in them. And more than likely, when you get your first round of sounds in there, you will realize that there's some changes that need to happen. You need to update your music, you need to change something with your sound effects, and you will have week 4 to revise anything and make any changes before the final version that you will deliver at the end of the month. All right, so I just wanted to start out with that information first. Let me switch over to Logic here. All right, let's take a listen to your Angry Bots submission. I have your ambient and 3 action cues here, and your 3 stinger files down here. I'm going to, I am going to play the part of the computer, mixing all of these different levels up and down. We'll start out with the ambient here, and then one at a time I'll bring up the different cues, and at the end we will end by listening to all of them at the same time. So let's go ahead and start with the ambient cue. All right, so we have a little bit of light percussion in there, providing a bit of a pulse. We have the progression moving all the way through. Good combination of instruments, creating a kind of solid, stealthy kind of feel. Main thing I would think is to have some variation. Once the instrumentation is established, it's pretty static all the way across, so creating more variation over time. You do have the changes in the progression. The progression moves and it kind of outlines what's coming up later in the other action cues, but the instrumentation is pretty much the same all the way through. So have one or two other layers kind of fade in and out over the course of the cue, maybe in the first third and the second third, or first half and or first third, middle third and last third, or first half, second half, that kind of stuff. So let's go ahead and bring in the buzzer. All right, so we got the low strings. A little bit of timpani there. So, especially with this ambient cue here, the percussion is pretty subtle. I would say try bringing out a little bit more intensity from this action cue. We'll see where the rest of the instrumentation of the mech and the spider go. But initially, with just these two playing, we'd probably like to hear a little bit more intensity from percussion in the buzzer cue. All right, let's go ahead and bring in the spider. All right, so here we have more like the high strings, kind of pizzicato plucks. Gives a cool kind of pace overall, but I really kind of feel it's missing that intensity. Again, stronger percussion, more of a rhythm will create that pacing overall. There we go. All right, so we have strong drums, the lead line from the brass. Probably say that's also a strong element that's missing from these two, because between I'd say the three of these are not necessarily as intense as just the two of these, and really it's all the mech. I mean, this adds a bit, but basically you've saved up a lot of power for just the mech. I would bring in stronger percussion and probably a bit of a lead line, something that foreshadows the mech, or not even really a lead line or a melodic line, but it could be something that's more along the lines of a thematic instrument or thematic sound that sort of indicates which cue you're in or which robot is coming after you. Here, I mean, I guess the difference here is the low strings and the high strings. But both of these create or support more of the progression than really focus on the melody. It's really nice and adds a lot with that mech. So, not necessarily to say that you need to have something as strong as the kick and snare and brass from the mech in the buzzer and the spider, but you can do things like layering kicks and snares, so that, or layering hits, like you have the kind of the timpanis in here. You might have more kind of electronic drums in this one, and then this gets you the full kit and the brass. So think about kind of compartmentalizing instrumentation, which you've definitely started to do already, and creating more intensity from the buzzer and the spider along with those sort of thematic ideas. All right, let's bring it all in together. All right, and everything mixes nicely. All four of these set to unity. You're at a good solid level all the way through. Yeah, so up every once in a while. So really close. Probably wouldn't cause too much of an issue, or if anything, you can just back everything back down a little bit in Wise when we ultimately put everything there. So everything compositionally works very well, rhythmically works well, harmonically, all the pieces fit together. It's just maybe bringing up the intensity of those two cues. Here are 3 stingers. All right, so I'm basically hearing this in each one of them, so it created a little bit more variation. I think this one works the best in that it has a layer kind of down below, has that low impact, and then it has almost what sounds like a bell ringing or a single note hitting on top. Maybe adding more reverb and a bit of delay to it could help kind of make it a little bit longer or more intense. Just have to make sure that these are going to compete. I think these two will probably compete with what's over here. This one doesn't sound as interesting or detailed maybe as these do. Where we have everything set up so that we can, hold on just a sec. Can I not save? Hold on, I just want to turn off my microphone on Logic here so I don't see the meters bouncing up and down. All right, so we have 2 submissions here. Actually, let me add the markers here so we know which is which. All right, so we have 2 student submissions from the feedback and peer review assignment on FSO. And we have 2 separate submissions to discuss. As you can see, everything is vertically laid out here. Actually, let me just give myself a little bit more room between these. Probably really don't need to move this marker, but there we go. Get it all lined up there. All right, so this is the submission for the Angry Bots composition, which we were working on last week. As you might have experienced, there's a reason why this is the second composition of the month. It is a bit more of a challenge overall to get everything working and prepared for the game project. This composition, the focus here, well, first off, this composition is a vertical composition, which means all of the tracks are stacked on top of each other, and then the game will have the ability to bring up and down the volume of these different layers whenever they are needed. Compositionally, we're focused on the idea of, or really the difference between ambient and action in the soundtrack and in the gameplay. The challenge of the music soundtrack for the game is the fact that for the most part, you're wandering around exploring through the level, and then there are very quick periods of action where the music will play during the time when the player is battling one of the robots. And there are 3 different types of robots in the game, and so there are 3 different action cues. The challenge here is the fact that any 1, 2, 3, or all 4 of these cues can be playing in any combination, and the ambient cue will always be there. So we have to create a composition where any one of these layers on its own makes sense, but when combined with it's a little bit of a challenge to get all 4 of these playing at the same time, or getting 3 of the robots on the screen at the same time, but you have to account for that possibility. And to make this vertical composition work, we have all of the cues start at the same time. They end at the same time. They compositionally, they should be the same tempo. They should be in the same time signature. They need to be the same in the same key, and also following a common chord progression, so that each one of them can play against the other layers at any time. Each one of these cues needs to have its own unique instrumentation. Watch out for any doubled instrumentation or any repeated instrumentation. Anytime a particular instrument occurs in more than one of these files, it will double or triple or just increase in its overall loudness. So that means each cue needs to have instrumentation that represents that particular robot that's coming out to attack. So common elements, if everything, there's so many elements that are similar, the key that it's in, the chord progression, the tempo, the time signature, then the elements that are going to be unique are the instrumentation for each particular cue, and then the thematic lines and the rhythmic elements that you're introducing. So again, one of the biggest focuses in the composition is the difference between ambient and action. So you can have either a little bit or a lot of information in the ambient cue, just as long as whatever comes with the action cues is that much bigger and louder and stronger. You need to have a lot of power added in, a lot of tension added in with the action cues, and it really needs to feel like these robots are coming out to attack and bent on your destruction. So we need to have a pretty strong change in dynamics, where the action cues need to bring in that energy level, that intensity that is required with the gameplay. So unique thematic instrumentation, kind of thematic lines that represent each one of the particular robots that's coming out to attack. You need to watch out for the mix. Actually, I'm going to probably bring this up here so we can see the meters, or at least the readouts there. We want to make sure that when the sum of these four parts plays together, that it doesn't completely overload the master. Just looking at them visually, they look like they're set up ready to go, starting at the same time, ending at the same time, should be able to loop together. Level-wise, we'll see when we mix all four of them together if they overload the master. If this is the case, then you typically, definitely watch out for putting any dynamic processing on the master, any compressors or limiters, so that while it sounds just fine while it sounds just fine in the session, when you're mixing all of these elements together, when you're bouncing out different groups of instruments, like I'm going to bounce out everything for my buzzer action cue now. Here's my 4 or 5 tracks of instruments. I'm going to bounce those out. Well, when it was part of the full mix, it was, if you have a compressor or a limiter on the master channel, then that is controlling all of the instruments. But when you bounce out just that group of instruments, it's now going to go through that and be compressed and limited as a group and become louder overall because it's not playing with all of the rest of the instruments. And you bounce it out and you recombine it together, and now it's much, much louder than the original. So watch out for putting any sort of compression or limiting on the master channel. Do it all on subgroups. Take all of your buzzer action instruments and route them to one buzzer action master, and then take all of your spider action instruments and route them all to a spider action master, and do all of your compression and limiting on those channels, and avoid anything on the master. That way you know that if those 4 channels are fine, when you go bounce them out individually, it won't be affected anywhere past that. Let's see. I think that's a lot of the elements that I needed to discuss. That's formatting of it. That's the composition, where everything's in the same tempo, time signature, key and meant to loop together the overall mix. You don't want to overload the master. What else? That's most of it, at least without actually listening to anything. I also have the stingers down. Oops, the stingers down here. Just kind of zoom in here. These look like they're the correct shape. Kind of a strong hit at the front and eventual fade out to silence over here. Depending on how loud all of this stuff is, these at least look lower in volume than the previous ones, but we'll see how they kind of stick out against the other cues. I think that is most of what I can come up with, just visually looking at all of the tracks. Let's go through. We're not going to listen to every single one of these cues individually. We'll start out by listening to the ambient. We'll get either part of the way through or all the way through that, and then bring up the action, buzzer action, and we'll probably listen to them by themselves and get a sense of what each one of the action cues are, and then I'll introduce another one, and eventually I will bring in all four of them at the same time to see how they do when they're playing together. But we'll kind of jump around through each one of these as we go. I think I am all set. Let's give it a try. All right. So we've got this arpeggiated bass line and a hi-hat. You hear the progression moving, changing over time. You get a sense of the pacing of everything from the hi-hat and the kind of the delay and arpeggiated line. The only thing I would say is that by this point, the instrumentation is pretty static. So introduce something that comes in and out over time, and it creates some variation through that particular cue. Here's the buzzer action cue. All right, here it is all by itself. All right, it sounds like the ambient, is the hi-hat in there? Like the bass line, or that synth is also in the buzzer cue. But the hi-hat isn't there. So watch out for any repeated instrumentation. If it was doing something else and maybe was at a different octave, that might work, but doing the same thing as the ambient cue will just just make it louder overall. All right, so the snare definitely helps in creating a little bit more activity. Might be good. There's a hi-hat. Might be good to add some other percussion that's kind of like the hi-hat over here, that sits on the 8th and 16th notes and just kind of speeds up the pacing through this cue. The lead definitely helps as a thematic instrument. Let's go ahead and bring in the spider here. All right, so now I was looking at these waveforms, and it seems like we had some repeated stuff that looked very similar. So here we also have that snare. What was the hi-hat? All right, so what you could do is, since this is more like a clap, is to make this one more just a more like a snare sound, although it's like a clappy kind of snare. But create another one and just have it be a layer to whatever's heard here. So instead of these, you can just hear how much it gets doubled and how loud it becomes. So watch out for the repeated instrumentation. Let's bring in the mech. All right, so now we got the kick. So the mech is unique. I don't think there's anything in here. Wait. Except for that baseline. Nope, that baseline's in here also. There needs to be more percussion than just the kick. While the kick adds, obviously, to this rhythm, that's brought in by adding the snares. By itself, you could have some more percussion that isn't that snare or that clap, or whatever I'm defining it as, to add more layers. It could just be big drums, more like timpanis, bass drums, just larger percussion overall might help. Or you might leave the snare, although I like that. I don't know. You're going to need to have some more percussive layers through here to create more power. I like the lead synth line here, but I really feel like this is the only one that does that. Everything else has more like pads. So it would be cool to have a couple of other lines that kind of play off of this main one here. Let's bring them all in together. Whoa, lots of snare. Okay, so yeah, when you play them at the same time, you get too much snare. It's not really overloading the master though, which is good. And all of the parts fit well together. Everything loops nicely. It should work nicely in the game. Just watch out for the bounced elements and watch out for the repeated stuff, because number one, it takes away from another layer that should also be there. Like having the snare in multiple places means that you're not using other snares or other percussion. Yeah, create more lines like this one, fill out the rhythms through the rest of the cues, and you should have something that works well. Let's do three stingers. All right, so I think these kind of border a little too much towards the sound effects side of things. This one and both of these are really, I don't know if it's just how loud they are or the type of sound. Sounds more like kind of a noise effect overall. This one feels, oops, jump back over here. This one feels more like an element that could work better as the stinger overall. I think all of these sit in the higher register. They need something with a lot of thump or impact at the front, a real big hit. And then this one is more kind of that ear candy and a little bit more pleasant to listen to. I think these, let's see how these sound when these play against here. It still needs like the real impact to create the downbeat. Let's turn these down. Yeah, I would say create an impact will help create that sort of attention-grabbing element of it. And then this one feels like it's a little bit more musical. Especially if you drenched it in a whole bunch of reverb, so it had a big long tail. I think those elements could work. Overall, I think it's nicely done and will work nicely for the game. Just a couple of tweaks mentioned. Yeah, let me know if you have any questions on that one. Let's jump over to our next one here. Reset everything. And we will start by listening to the ambient cue. Kind of a slow bass, some interesting kind of delayed tones in the back, and then this sort of high cymbal kind of feel to it. I would say the same thing. It's pretty, it works establishing a good foundation, but it's pretty static by the time it gets towards the second half. Think about dividing this into either first half, second half, or thirds, where you have the first, second, and third part, and just adding and subtracting different elements over time to create more variation. Let's bring in the buzzer here. All right, so the hi-hat adds a good pacing to everything. But it needs a little bit more power, probably needs some low end, maybe just some a bit more percussion, just big percussive impacts that happen on the bar, maybe. That's something like dun, 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 dun. Just big hits. Bomb. Dun, dun. Bum, bum, bum. So just interspersed in there to create a little bit more low end, a little bit more impact and more power. The line, I like the lead line, kind of plays through here, gives it a bit of character for that particular cue. All right, let's add spider in here. All right, so here, okay, watch out for, I like the breakthrough here. Definitely adds more power, but that then compared against this makes this one sound a lot less powerful. Then watch out for that repeated lead line because it's going to get doubled up as they play together. All right, so these two lines work well against each other. I don't think there's anything repeated between these two, which is good. I'd say with all of these, I'm still missing the low end. It feels like it really needs like a sub element to it, and that might be hard to add in every single one of them, or else it'll stack up and get to sound muddy. But if you worked on octaves and you did one has the sub bass and then one has an octave layer of a bass and with a little bit more movement to it, I think those elements could work. But like these two rhythmic elements play against each other nicely. It has its own lead element. Bring back the ambient, I guess that helps. Okay, so the ambient then really has the low end in it. The problem with that, though, is that it creates power in the ambient cue that then feels missing when these come in. So maybe hold off on that bass element in the ambient cue and add those layers in through the action cues. All right, let's bring it all in together and see how plays back. Alright, so good. It doesn't overload the master. They should all work well as they play together. Each layer has its own kind of unique instrumentation that helps it stand out, but definitely do watch out for the stuff that is doubled up in the cues. Alright, so everything works nicely for the game. I think just kind of a reordering of some of the instrumentation, making sure things don't get doubled up, and it will work nicely for the game overall. Let's bring these in. Alright, so I think those should work. I think especially they would work for something like the spider because it's so focused on what the kind of snare is doing here. Let's just throw this in here, see what happens. Alright, so this one you have to watch out for because it makes it feel like it's off. Let's play this one. Here. Is it the same snare as this? Yes. So, and is this the mech? No, it's the buzzer. Having that snare sound be the same as this snare sound means that it feels like this is just coming in out of time. So you got to watch out for utilizing any of the same, even though maybe it's not exactly the same, maybe it's just another snare. But it can make these elements feel like they are not playing in time with the rest of the music. Let's try something like, let me just throw this here. Bring these back down. Yeah, anything that's even rhythmic like that could kind of clash rhythmically against the rest of the instrumentation. I think that works. I think just part of the problem, I don't know if it's really a problem, is the fact that this is so fast. As it should be for the style of music, but it makes other things that are even slightly rhythmic kind of really feel jumbled. If it came in against the mech, right, if we did this, it probably wouldn't feel so bad. Because you got a little bit more room. Oops, got a little bit more room. Let's just throw this one in there. Mech. Yeah, even that one's a little fast. Or it's just like there's not enough room. That's a little bit better. So think about elements that are not so much like snares, because then they could feel like they're rhythmically off time, and have something hit real fast and then a whole bunch of reverb, and avoid the rhythmic elements. All right. Go back to where I was here. So, oh my, that's too far. I think that all should be good. All right, so those are my observations for your compositions here. Again, everything should work out pretty well for the game. A couple of things that you might want to tweak before you get everything set up, or just put it into the game, see how it all works together. But for everybody working on your 2D platformer and Angry Bots setup in Wise, if you have any questions as you progress through the month, please let me know. But right now, we will turn it over to the archive, which will describe how to set everything up with your game projects and the Wise audio software. Thanks. From the week 2 assignments into the new week 3 assignments. And I want to go over just a few of the aspects of how to set up your Wise session, how to use Wise, of course, and how to import your music and your sound effects and get them working in the game. There's a couple of things that will you want to make sure that you start from the very beginning to make sure that this is all going to work correctly for you. And the first one is to make sure that you have the proper version of Wise set up and installed. So for this month, we are using the Wise version 2016. And my version will load up here on this end in just a sec. Make sure you have the correct version of Wise installed. If not, you would go back to the Audio Kinetic webpage and install the correct version, which looks like this. Hold on just a sec. Come here. Come here, webpage. You would go to Audio Kinetic's web page and download Wise over here. This is going to download the Wise launcher, which looks like this, the Wise launcher. And in here, you want to make sure that you've gone to Wise. I'll do this later. You go to Wise, and you want to make sure that the version's installed. One of them says 2016 on it. If not, then you can do install new versions and make sure you have a 2016 version installed. It shouldn't matter which one you do, but just go for the most recent one, the biggest number, right? Which at the time of filming is 2016.2.6.6153. Just get the newest one and install that, and when you launch, it will look something like this. So, now, first and foremost, you need to have the correct version of Wise installed, and there's more detailed instructions on FSO to get that installed. The next thing would be to have a couple of files set up on your desktop to make this project work. So what we are going to do is we'll go to FSO here and show you all of the files that you have to download. So let me find that real quick. I am going to go. Let me get to the correct class first. All right, so here we are in week 3. You should download everything, go through and watch the Wise overview video that is an overview of Wise. It leads you through windows and menus and the overall structure of your files. And you'll download also the 2D platformer Wise setup and Angry Bots Wise setup. We'll be talking about that next week, or not next week, on our next session. and our chiptune composition, which I'll also talk about today. So let's start out here with our 2D platformer Wise setup. In here, there's a video that will recreate a lot of what I'm saying here. So there's a bit more detailed information there. And there's also all of the downloads for the assignment. There is a PDF that also follows along step by step with all of this process. You can download the video from above, but make sure you download this 2D Platformer Wise zip file. This is the session that we will be using. So make sure you have a copy of that downloaded. You're also going to need a copy of the game, which you should already have downloaded. But if you need to find, again, a copy of the game, you can go back to week 1, where we started 2D Platformer. Go to the game composition assignment and re-download this zip file. That's where the copy of the game is. So let's go ahead and set up a couple of things that we need to. The first thing I'm going to do is just create a folder. I'm going to do this all on my desktop, and I recommend that you do the same while you are working on the project so that all of the files are easily accessible. I'm going to name this 2D Platformer. And in this folder, I'm going to take that zip file that we just downloaded from FSO. I'm going to unzip it. I don't need the zip file after that. So I'll just take that folder. This is the Wise project that is provided. This is what we're going to use with all of the files that we need. So we'll just start with a copy of that. Then we're going to get a copy of the game, as I mentioned before. Go into your downloaded version of the game application and make sure that these two files are next to each other. This is extremely important to make sure that this works properly. If the 2D Platformer file is not there, right next to this 2D Platformer Wise folder, it will not work, which is also stated here on FSO. In the assignments, if these two files, warning, make sure you have these two files next to each other or things will not work, right? So make sure if you are having any sort of issues at the end of this process, make sure that you have everything set up correctly. And will solve a lot of any sort of troubleshooting you might encounter. All right, the other thing we're going to do is create a folder called Media. And in this Media folder, I'm going to create another folder called Music. If I can spell it right, Music. And I'll create another one called Sound Effects. And this is, I'm going to put all of my music and sound effects in here that I created, just so I can have quick and easy access to those. So let me do that real quick. Let's see. I'm going to go back to my original composition files and a copy of my sound effects and bring them in there, which looks like this. So I'm going to go get all of my music files. I'm going to take a copy of those. Let's try that again. Drop my music in my music folder. I'm going to back up, go find all of my sound effects. Should have 18 sound effects. And I'm going to make a copy and put that in my sound effects folder. And this is for no reason other than to have very quick, easy access to all the files that I need. All right, at this point, I can launch Wise and make sure I open up the project to get started. somewhere. It would load up. Should just be patient here. And we are going to navigate to the project that we need. You probably don't have this project right here. Your recent projects is probably blank. And we just need to hit Open Other, and then navigate to that project, which is on your desktop. It's called 2D Platformer. You're going to go to 2D Platformer Wise. And then you're going to find this 2D Platformer Wise project, the wproj file. This is the session. Double click that, and Wise will load it up. It provides you with all of the setup that you need to get started on the project. So we are going to start out by working on the music. We're going to get that set up. And then we are also going to set up the sound effects. And I will kind of go through it at a quicker pace here. It is explained in a bit more detail in the other videos, but I do want to kind of show an overview of how this is going to work. All right, so we have different layouts that we'll be using. We'll mostly be alternating between the designer layout and the interactive music layout. And I'm also going to be spending time switching between the audio tab, the events tab, and the sound banks tab. So audio is where all of my audio is going to go. I'm going to import all of my WAV files here. I'm going to set them up and make them work appropriately for the game. Audio is added to events, and events are the messages that are sent from the game into Wise. The game has no idea about your music or your sound effects, has no idea about the audio. All it knows is that if it calls out these commands or these messages, that Wise will respond and play the correct audio file. So all we're going to have control over is when the music begins and when it ends. And this will create all of the interactivity that we need for our music. And then whenever we need a particular sound effect in the game just calls one of these events and it plays the corresponding sound. We'll have to set that up, but that is our overall approach with our events. So audio is attached to events, and both audio and events end up in sound banks. Sound banks are one of the final formats that is used by the game itself. When you are done with your session, you do not bounce a file like you do in a DAW. You create your entire composition and you bounce out the final version. Here in Wise, you are going to build the project. And when you build the project, it creates a couple of files that the game can use to actually play back while somebody is playing the game. When you go to sell and distribute your game, you do not want to have a whole bunch of loose WAV files sitting on the game disk that everybody can steal and change and have access to copyrighted material. So instead, these sound banks will encrypt the files. It will take all of your WAV files, all of the data that you put into Wise, and encrypt it in something. It's not really a zip file, but it can kind of sort of be thought of as a zip file, where it's a file that contains a whole bunch of other files that is encrypted and compressed, and also is set up to work on multiple different platforms. So Wise speaks the language of a Nintendo Switch or a PlayStation, a Sony PlayStation, or a Microsoft Xbox, or an iOS or an Android device. It speaks all of these different languages, and the sound bank converts all of the files and is the file that the game actually uses. So this is just a quick overview of the types of files we'll be interacting with. So I'm going to start out by creating the music system. Setting up the music to work properly in the game. We have two events, when the music begins and when the music ends. So already set up in the game, when the game starts, it calls out this command or this event called play music begin. So when the game starts, this is what we want to do with your music. You have 3 intro files. The game is going to randomly choose one of them. It's going to play that file. Then when it's done, it's going to transition into the main loops. Then there are 3 main loops. It is going to randomly choose a main loop file and play it all the way through until it's done. Then it plays the next main loop file. Randomly chooses another one, plays all the way through that, and then it'll randomly choose another one, and keep doing that forever until the game is over. When the game is over, when you when you lose all of your health. The game is over when the character falls off the level, kind of falls into the sludge down below. When the game is over, musically, we want any music that was playing, we want that to stop. And then when it does, then we're going to play one of the 3 ending cues. Randomly choose an ending and play it. And then it will play it once, it'll stop, and then the whole game will start all over again. So that's a general setup of our music. We start out in the audio tab here, and we are going to drag our music to drag our music to this default work unit in the interactive music hierarchy. We have a master mixer hierarchy, we have an actor mixer hierarchy, we have an interactive music hierarchy. I think these are long, drawn-out ways of saying something pretty simple. The master mixer hierarchy is all of our buses. This is our master output bus. If we had a dialogue bus, a music bus, a sound effects bus, if we had different groups of sounds or instruments or music together, this will contain all of our buses to organize it. Actor mixer is all of the sound effects. When we set up all of our sound effects, we're going to drag the wave files here. And we are going to set them up appropriately. The interactive music hierarchy is for the music. So basically we have buses, sound effects, and music. Each one of these has something called a default work unit. And we actually will not be using these default work units except for to basically organize our files. We are not, the basics of a default work unit allows multiple people to work on the same session at the same time or at different times. So you can, a default work unit is a unit of work. It's some files, it's some process that you want to do, and you are going to take that work, move it over to your computer, work in your session, and then bring it back into the main session. Since everybody is working on their own individual projects, we're really not using these to their full potential, and it's not necessary. But if you were working on a large team, it allows you to separate the work that's done by everybody and still bring it back together in a session that makes sense. All right, so we're going to start out with our music. I'm going to go back to the folder where we created and imported all the files that we needed, or kind of organized all the files we needed. I'm going to go to my music here, and I'm going to drag these into the interactive music hierarchy. And I am going to drop them right on the default work unit here. So I dragged all of these files down here right on top of this default work unit. And this audio file importer window pops up. Right now, the default is perfectly fine, and we can hit import at this point. There's a lot of settings that you could set up here if you had specific uses for the files, but the defaults will work just fine. We can hit import. It's going to import all of our files. We now see our music endings, our intros, and our loops in Wise. And we need to set up a way for these files to play back together. Right now, they're just individual, so we need to group them together in certain ways so that they play back correctly in the game. If you were going to load up a whole bunch of music for a party and you put it into iTunes or your favorite music player and you wanted to sequence them to play in a certain order, you would put them in a playlist. Playlist is a very common term for kind of sequencing music together. And we are going to do the same thing here. We are going to put our intros and our main loops together in a playlist so that when the game starts, it's going to play back these files correctly. I can highlight all of these files, and then I can put them together in a playlist. Let's see here. Can I widen this out? Show me all the buttons. Let's see. There we go. Sorry. Before I highlight all of these, I'm going to click on the default work unit up here, and this button right here in the middle says Create New Playlist Music Playlist Container. This is the icon that we're going to use to create that container. Everything in Wise is a container. Well, not everything, but containers contain other files. That's mainly the approach that they're going for with that terminology. But if we want to now highlight all of these intros and main loops, we can drag them into the playlist container. And we're going to rename this. I can either rename it over here. I can right-click and choose Rename. And I'm going to call this Music Playlist, no, Music, sorry, Begin _ Playlist. All right, so a playlist allows us to sequence our files together. We have these files set up. I'm going to create another playlist. I'm going to click back on my default work unit, and I'm going to click this icon for another playlist, and I'm going to call this Music End _ Playlist. I'm going to drag all of my endings here. And now, this kind of organizes them together, but it doesn't actually set up any sort of order or sequence for these playlists. And that is done in the interactive music layout. If I go to the Layouts menu, I choose Interactive Music, and it gives, the windows change a little bit, and I need to go down here. This portion is called the Music Playlist Editor. So if I click on Playlists, I can see the appropriate order of all the files. So I'm going to start out up here, Music Begin Playlist. It's empty right now, so I'm going to drag in all of these intro files one at a time. Unfortunately, you cannot select and highlight multiple files at the same time and drag them in. Just click on each one of them, drag it into the playlist. If you accidentally click off of the playlist, you'll see these waveforms. If somehow you get lost in here, you see these waveforms, always click back on the playlist. We'll get you back to the playlist editor. This is one of the more tedious and difficult aspects of making this work, is just kind of navigating around. Make sure you always select back to the playlist, and you can have your 3 intros and your main loops playing here. All right. Now, this playlist says sequence continuous. That means it's going to play these in a sequence continuously. It's going to start at intro 1, and then it's going to play intro 2, then intro 3, then main loop 1, 2, and 3, which is not at all what we want to do. So let's start here. All right, so it plays them in order. Which is, like I said, not at all what we want. We want of the 3 intros, we want one of them to be chosen once, and then it's going to move into the main loops, and we want it to then randomly choose main loops infinitely, and just do it over and over again. So we need to group these files together. We have the intro group and the main loop group. I am going to click on my sequence continuous segment up here, or yeah, I guess it would be a group. I'm going to create new groups. Sometimes if it puts a group inside of another group, you can just kind of drag them out of each other. You want to make sure that each of the groups are on the same level. So we're going to drag these 3 intros in here. Intro 1, 2, and 3. Oops, I missed. All right, there's intro 1, 2, and 3. Then we're going to go main loop 1, 2, and 3. All right, so this still doesn't solve anything because, again, sequence continuous plays them in a sequence continuously. It's going to go from the first one down into the first group here. It's going to play 1, 2, and 3, down to the second group, main loop 1, 2, and 3, and then be done. So we have a couple of different options here. We have sequence continuous, sequence step, random continuous, and random step. So we have sequence, the words sequence and random, and continuous and step. Sequence means it plays them in order. Random means it plays them in a random order. Continuous means that when the first one is done, it'll play the next one. Step means that you have to hit play each time, or you have to trigger the event each time for it to move forward. It will randomly set something up or play it in sequence, but it has to be poked each time to make it work. So in this case, the top layer needs to be sequence continuous because once it goes from this, we want it to go down to here. But when it goes into the intro group, we want it to randomly choose it, but we only want that to happen once. So we're going to choose that to random step. So it's going to randomly fire one of these off and play it one time, and then it's going to go down to the next one. This one we're also going to set to random step. So it's going to come down to this one, play, randomly choose one of them, and only play it one time, though, which is not what we want for the main loops because we want that to go on infinitely. So there's this other column over here called loop count. It says how many times do you want it to do that thing. And for the main loops, you want it to do it infinitely. If you hit the down arrow on this second main loop group, you can switch it to infinite, and it will play through this section. It will randomly choose one of them, fall out, but come back through this loop infinitely for as long as the game is being played. So let's try this out. If I click this main music begin playlist and hit play, it's going to randomly choose an intro, but only do that once, and then jump down into the main loops and hopefully do this infinitely. So it is switching, and it's doing exactly what we wanted it to. So random step will work for each one of your groups, and you want to set the music to be infinite. If it only plays one time and stops, we want to make sure that we want to set it to play infinitely. All right. So this is how this playlist should work. Let's go to our music end playlist. This is going to be really simple. We're just going to drag all 3 of our endings in here and set it to random step so that it just does this once. Randomly chooses an ending, plays it, and then it's over. The game will start over again, and all of the music will start again. All right, so this is how the audio is set up, but this doesn't set up the events. Once we have the WAV files controlling as we want them, I'm just going to go to project here. I'm going to do project save. We should have probably done that a while ago, but save. Also notice that it's not Command S, it is Control S to save properly in 2D platformer. For reasons that The application kind of thinks it's a Windows application, but it's just wrapped and running on Mac. So I just typically just go hit File Save to be sure. All right, now we have set up our audio. Now it's time to move on to the events. We have two events. We have music begin and music end. So setting up the music begin should be pretty straightforward. All we need to do is to play this music begin playlist. So let me take a step back here. Events have actions. There's anytime you click on one of these events over here, you're going to get access to these double arrows, and you have different actions like play, break, which will allow you to kind of pause and move on to the next thing. Post event, which will allow you to trigger any other events. You can stop, you can pause, you can mute, you can change a bus volume, you can change an individual audio file's voice volume, you can change the voice pitch, you can add a low pass filter, a high pass filter, you can change mix states, you can turn on and off switches, change game parameters. There's a lot of different things that you can do from these events. Remember, these are the messages that are sent from the game. The game knows nothing about your audio file. It just calls out these different events, and Wise takes care of the rest. So this music begin playlist, we want to play something, and then we hit browse. When you hit browse, it may look like this. It maybe looks like this, and it's kind of grayed out. Doesn't look like there's anything to choose. But if you go to the, let's see here, where is it hidden? What did I do here? You play, browse. I go to the actor mixer hierarchy, and the interactive music hierarchy. I'm in my music. And I want to play this music begin playlist. Once I hit OK, well, actually, you want to play the music begin playlist. You do not want to play any of the individual files, or it'll just play that one file. You set up all the interactivity in the playlist, so make sure you trigger that. At this point, if I hit play, it will play that event. Notice it says play music begin down here in the transport, so you know which event you're playing. And it starts playing that playlist. And it gets to the part where it randomizes, and it will do that infinitely. So next is the end playlist. The end event. The first thing we want to do is we want to stop the music begin playlist. Anything that was playing, no matter where you were, when the game is over, you're going to turn it off. So we have the play event. We also have a stop event. We want to stop just this one file. We don't want to stop everything. You could stop all of the audio in the game if you wanted to. Probably wouldn't be a very good idea right now. But we hit stop, and we want to stop that music begin playlist. That will cut off the previous music. Now we want to play. And we'll hit browse again, and we want to play the ending. Oops, let me try that again. Hit browse. We want to play the ending cue. All right, so when the game is over, it's going to call out play music end. That's going to stop the music that was playing and play just one of the random files in the end playlist. All right. So that should set up our music. Let's hit play. Let's hit begin. Let's go over to the ending. And it should stop, end there, and be done. All right. So I'm going to go back to Project Save. Now that I have my music set up, I am going to go back to the Audio tab, and now I'm going to tackle the sound effects. These should be pretty straightforward. Most of it is just you have the events. Again, the events are really important. It tells you all of the files or all of the messages that the game can speak, all of the messages that it can send you, and you basically need to respond with audio. And you'll see these match the sound effects: bomb boom, bomb fuse, bomb pickup, bomb set down, enemy death, gunshot, health pickup, jump, ouch, and taunt. So we need to set up these events. We need to start over in the Audio tab. We are going to work on the actor mixer hierarchy now on this default work unit. This is for the sound effects. I'm going to go back over to my sound effects over here, and I'm just going to highlight all of my WAV files. Again, this is why we kind of organized it all together so you have quick access. Highlight all of my WAV files and drag them into my actor mixer hierarchy. You want to make sure you go on that default work unit right here. Make sure you drag onto that. And once you do, then you can see this audio file importer screen. Again, all of the files should be just fine, so we're going to hit import. I'll just go to project save. And now I have all of my WAV files. They'll start out blue. Blue audio files mean that they have not been converted yet into the format that is necessary for the game. This will happen when you build the sound bank. One of the things the sound bank does is compress all the files, convert them, change them into any formats that are necessary. But for the time being, it should work just fine that they are blue, but throws some people off when they see the different color there. So most of these are fine. If I just go ahead and play a sound, we hear the sounds being played.
Bums away.
So one thing we need to do are for these files that have multiple different versions. Enemy Death 1, 2, and 3. Jump 1, 2, and 3. Ouch 1, 2, and 3. And Taunt 1, 2, and 3. We want them in a single event, or each one of them has their own kind of single event. We don't want the 3 files to be played at the same time, so we want to randomize them. So I'm going to click on this default work unit again, and up here, this icon that looks like all the little dots at the top, this is called a random container. And a random container allows you to randomize files. Anytime it asks, it's just going to randomly feed it a file. So we're going to create a couple of these, and I'm going to name them SFX Enemy Death. Probably don't need to capitalize everything. Then I'm going to create another one. Each time I'm going to click on the default work unit. I'm going to click this icon here to create another random container. And I'll just create a couple of them, so I don't have to keep going back. All right, the next one, I am going to go SFX, and I'm going to name this Jump. I'll just right click this time and do rename. Oh, let's try that again. There we go. This time I'm going to call it SFX Ouch. And the last one here is SFX Taunt. There we go. So I'm going to take all of my enemy death files. I'm going to drag them into enemy death. I'm going to take all of my ouch files and drag them into ouch. I'm going to take all of my taunt files and drag them into taunt. Going to take all of my jump files and drag them into jump. All right, so this should get all of our audio files set up for the game. I'm just going to, again, go back to Project Save. Now all we need to do is set up the events, which should always, each one of these should be real simple to do. So all we need to do is go ahead. We are going to play a file. We can hit Browse, and this time I'm going to go up here to my actor mixer hierarchy. This is Bomb Boom, so I'm going to choose Bomb Boom. You don't even go to the next one. You don't even have to hit play in this. It'll just do it automatically. If you hit Browse, this is Bomb Fuse, so I'll set that one up. This is Bomb Pickup. I'll hit Browse, and I'll choose Pickup. I'll go to Set Down, hit Browse, choose Set Down, go to Enemy Death, hit Browse. This time I want to make sure I choose the random container. Do not choose the individual files. You want to use the random container itself. So I'll set that one up. There's enemy death. Here's gunshot. Browse. shot, health pickup, browse, health pickup, jump. Again, I've selected the jump random container. Ouch. Select ouch random container, taunt. Select taunt random container. All right. Now I have messages. Seem to work. All right. At this point, I am ready to go. I can build the game, or I can build the project and test it out in the game to make sure everything is playing back properly. And this is done by going to the Layouts menu again, and we're going to choose Sound Bank. And over here in the Sound Bank, you'll notice that there's one sound bank here called Sound Bank. It is set up for the Mac platform, and the English is set to, the language is set to English. So we're ready to go. All we should have to do at this point is hit generate. And when you hit generate, this message will pop up, and it says evaluation mode. Sound banks contain 27 media items out of 200. It gives you this generic message, and it should have built all of the files correctly. The way you can test this out is you go out of Wise, and you go to this game application that we brought into this folder. Now, when early on, we made sure that this application is next to this folder so that when you hit generate, it actually backs out of all of this 2D Platformer Wise folder and knows to go into here. And then let me show you the location that it drops the files. If we do show package contents, we can actually get a folder structure of this application. Go to apps, go to contents. Resources. Now you don't actually have to do this, but it'll show you what's going on here. In resources, we'll go to data. In data, we'll go to streaming assets. In streaming assets, we will go to audio. We'll go to generated sound banks and the Mac folder. And right here today, at the current time, it shows that we have created this file. The setup that we have done in Wise is now going to play back in the game. So now let me back out of all of this, and you can now run the game application and hear your music and sound effects play. There is a little bit more information about how to appropriately mix and how to adjust levels. I'll leave that up for the video game. Well, you have to do it for the video game. I'll leave that up for the video. To explain a bit more detail, but that should get you up and running and make things work properly for the game. Again, if you reach this point and you are in Wise and you have generated here and the message that pops up is in red and it gives you all sorts of errors, read the errors, make sure that you're not missing a file. Sometimes it's complaining about the setup inside of Wise. Or other times, if you go try to play the music and you don't hear anything, it would be the fact that this 2D Platformer application and the 2D Platformer Wise folders were not next to each other when you built. So double check that, or if you have any other issues, please get into contact with us and your instructor can help you out. So what else? Let me go back to here. That's the overall approach for 2D Platformer. And on Thursday, we'll talk a bit more on Angry Bots. I'll point out a few more interesting approaches for how Angry Bots will be set up in Wise. Please work on these projects throughout the week so that we can answer any questions before the weekend. Don't leave it to Sunday night in case any sort of issues come about. And the last project I want to discuss here is your chiptune composition. It's not entirely wise. We do have a composition this week. We will listen in peer review next week for anybody that submits. But this is a composition in the style of the original Nintendo platform. It is a traditional linear composition. It doesn't have to loop. It's not interactive in any sort of way. The composition itself is 1 minute to 2 minutes long. And I'm most interested that you are following the restrictions of the original Nintendo system to kind of get a sense of what composition was like back in these earlier systems overall. And so with this project, I was a bit hesitant at first when we started this, thinking that it would end in less than optimal compositions, less than listenable music because of the limitations of the sounds. The sounds don't really sound all that great or aren't as interesting or complex compared to modern synths and DAWs. But what I ended up finding is that most people end up having your focus on the composition a whole lot more, and you're not hiding behind kind of the production and the sounds and things like arpeggiators and drum machines that will do it all for you. And so there's a strong focus on the composition and the development of the music. So again, there is about a minute-long composition. When you download the project, you get a session that a Logic session that provides all of the sounds that you are going to be using for this composition, for this project. So some of the main restrictions are, number one, you have to use the sounds that are provided with the project. Those come in the form of EXS24 sound banks. If you click on any one of these tracks, they are all equipped with EXS24, and you have a couple of presets that were sampled directly from the original Nintendo and Famicom systems. And so these are very simple, straightforward effects. They're not all that wonderful sounding, but they're very musical, very melodic, and so you might spend more time at a faster pace or with staccato instrumentation so that you don't stick too long on holding a chord, so that there's a lot more movement and energy to the mix. So let's see here. Can I even get something going? So provided are a couple of chiptune sound banks. Let's see here, like drums and basic tones and synths. So you have to use the sounds that are provided for the project. You are limited to only 4 simultaneous instruments playing at the same time. You can use more than 4 tracks. You just can't have more than 4 playing at any one time. So you can have as many as you want. Four. That means one of them has to be a drums, one of them has to be melody. You need drums and melody at some point in the composition. The other 2, you could have drums, bass, harmony, melody. You could have drums, harmony, melody, melody, or like drums, harmony, melody, counter melody, or drums, melody, melody, melody. Depends on how you want to approach it. But you can have any combination as long as you have drums and a melodic idea. Of course, the progression, the melody all need to develop over the course of the minute or so composition. You can have more than 4 tracks. You just need to make sure that they are there's only 4 of them playing at any one time. What else? So you have to use the sounds. You're limited to the number of tracks. You have to have drums. You have to have melody. Oh, the melody has to change at some point. In order to do that, you're probably best to duplicate a track. And let's see, track. do it this way. I'm thinking too hard. So duplicate the track and then use another sound for your lead melody, but only 4 of them playing at any one time. So I have a couple of student submissions. These are some of the better ones that I've had, but it shows you the capability of what is possible. So here is the first one. Let's do it this way. Hold on, I want to make sure I have a volume control. One moment. All right, so this one really shows why faster, more staccato movements and a faster pace overall works very well to maintain energy from the cues, or maintain energy through the piece. Especially this part right here. So faster arpeggiated parts, like arpeggios moving through the chord changes, work well to outline and give a lot of material to pull from. Here's the next one. Let's see, let's try this. So good energy, lots of changes also throughout. Big sweeps through chords. Having things on the quarter note, 8th notes, 32nd, or 16th and 32nd gives a lot of room for all these changes. So, and each one of these is only 4 tracks playing at any one time. They're just constantly switching their sounds back and forth. All right, and one more. And there's just a whole lot of movement in here. Again, these are kind of really classic chiptune approaches where you're repeating the notes or doing quick sweeps through arpeggios. All right, so a lot of activity, a lot of great ideas through each one of those. Certainly those are the top end of the spectrum of the overall quality, but hopefully gives you some inspiration about where these might go. All right, so that is all of the different aspects we wanted to talk about. We wanted to go over the week 2 submissions. Good job for everybody that did submit from the Angry Bots composition, and hopefully it inspires more people to submit for our chiptune peer review that we will do next week. And we talked about the 2D platformer assignment and the chiptune assignment. We'll dive into the Angry Bots later on this week. All right, so please let me know if you have any questions, and yeah, we'll keep moving forward. We'll get into next week and talk about wrapping everything up for the month. So, all right, let me know if you have any questions, and other than that, have a good day. Thanks.